Imagine a young man standing in a dusty village street. Behind him, a life of ploughing fields, herding animals, or hammering iron. Ahead, a future etched in iron and fire. He's about to step into the greatest war machine the world has ever known, the Roman legion. And he knows that once he takes the oath, there's no turning back. This is not just a story about an army. This is about how Rome turned ordinary men into instruments of conquest, loyalty, and legend. In the earliest days of the Republic, war wasn't a profession. It was a duty. Every free man, no matter how humble, was expected to answer Rome's call when enemies approached. They left their farms and shops behind, not for glory or gold, but because it was their obligation to the city. There were no salaries, no promises, only shields paid from personal coin and swords sharpened by calloused hands. When the war ended, they went home, resumed their lives, and waited for the next horn to sound. This model worked, until it didn't. Rome grew, and with growth came endless borders, rebellious provinces, and foreign powers hungry to strike. A city's militia was no longer enough. Rome needed a permanent, professional, and loyal force. It needed soldiers who would fight not just out of duty, but by design. Enter Augustus. The first emperor didn't just reshape Roman politics, he reshaped the Roman soldier. Augustus implemented regular wages, generous land rewards, and lifelong status for those who served with honor. He made military service a career, especially attractive to the lower classes. For a poor man, joining the legion wasn't just a job. It was a ticket to status, income, and potential citizenship for his family. But with that transformation came a shift in allegiance. Soldiers no longer swore loyalty to the Senate or the city. Their allegiance was to their general, to the man who commanded them, to the one who rewarded them. That bond, personal and dangerous, would later fuel civil wars. But for now, it gave birth to an army that could march without question, kill without hesitation, and hold the line when death loomed inches away. The backbone of this new army was its structure, an engineering marvel of discipline. A Roman legion between 5,000 to 6,000 men was no mob. It was a living organism of war, split into 10 cohorts, each further divided into maniples and sentries. Orders flowed through this hierarchy like blood through veins. Swift, controlled, absolute. Each piece of this puzzle had its place. The centurion, the spine of discipline, commanded about 80 men. He wasn't a distant officer. He fought alongside his men, punished them, taught them, bled with them. And above him, the tribunes and legate, a general's trusted circle, ensuring the machine operated without flaw. This organization allowed for incredible battlefield maneuvers. While other armies broke into chaos, the Roman legion adapted, regrouped, and struck like a single, coordinated beast. From northern Britannia to the burning sands of Africa, from the thick forests of Germania to the mountain passes of Syria, this system held firm. But what made it truly terrifying wasn't just the numbers or the formation. It was the man inside the armor, the legionary. Before he ever wielded a gladius, before he ever stood in rank, he had to be chosen, and that choice was brutal. Recruitment wasn't random. Officers known as conquistadores roamed villages, scouting men between 18 and 23. But they weren't just looking for muscle. They judged character, literacy, skills, even lineage. Blacksmiths, tailors, carpenters. If you could contribute to the army's function, you had value. Could you read? You might someday command. From a good family, you might rise in rank. Slaves and criminals were denied, except in desperate times. Even auxiliary troops from the provinces, archers from Syria, cavalry from Gaul, had standards to meet. But for the Roman legion itself, the requirements were unforgiving. Once accepted, the recruit received a medal identification tag, a small piece of metal with his name. But this wasn't just ID, it was identity. To lose it was to lose honor, and dishonor in the legions was worse than death. From that moment on, he belonged to Rome. To belong wasn't enough. He had to be broken, reshaped, rebuilt. The transformation had just begun. The real enemy of the Roman soldier wasn't the barbarian at the gate. It was weakness, and Rome had no place for the weak. The moment a recruit stepped into the training camp, he entered a crucible. This wasn't training, it was purification. What emerged would be something different than what entered, a creature molded by exhaustion, pain, and relentless routine. The first test was simple: endurance. For 4 brutal months, recruits were driven to their physical and mental edge. Every day began before sunrise, often before the sky turned grey. They marched with 20 kilos of gear strapped to their backs, armor, weapons, tools, rations. At first, they covered 30 kilometers in 5 hours, but that wasn't enough. Soon, it was 35 kilometers, same time, less rest, faster pace. And there were no exceptions. Whether it rained, whether it froze, whether the dust choked the lungs or the sun burned the skin, marching never stopped. Blisters were ignored. Bleeding feet were wrapped in cloth, and the march continued. This was Rome's first lesson. The battlefield begins long before the first enemy appears. But marching was just the beginning. Between treks, the recruits ran, climbed, swam, jumped, and lifted. They trained not just muscles, but survival. Could you function on little food? Could you sleep on stone and still wake ready to move? Could you carry your own body plus your gear for hours and still fight at the end of it? Rome wasn't training soldiers, it was forging war beasts. The instructors, usually veterans who had seen real blood, showed no mercy. They insulted, pushed, punished. Their job was to break the civilian, to destroy hesitation, to strip comfort. If you collapsed, you were carried off, but not with pity. You were gone. Rome didn't need half-men, it needed iron. And once the body could take no more, then came the next phase, weapons training. It began with the gladius, the short Roman sword, simple but deadly. But recruits didn't get the real one. They trained with wooden versions, double the weight. Why? Because when the day came to draw real steel, it would feel like a feather. Every swing, every thrust, every block was practiced against wooden posts, stationary and moving, over and over, until the motion became instinct. No thought, no hesitation, just strike, block, advance. These drills were done in full armor. Sweat soaked the tunic, muscles burned, arms trembled, but still they continued, because hesitation in training meant death in war. A real enemy wouldn't wait for you to catch your breath. Alongside the gladius came the pilum, the Roman javelin, a weapon of brilliant design. Its iron tip was crafted to bend on impact, so once thrown, the enemy couldn't hurl it back. But precision was key. One pilum, one shot. Miss, and the moment was lost. Soldiers trained to throw at precise distances, in coordination, just before the charge. Timing mattered. Seconds meant lives. And then there was the armatura. This was no game. Armatura was full-contact combat simulation. Steel met steel, wooden shields cracked, bruises were earned. These were mock battles designed to recreate the chaos of real war, no mercy, no rehearsals. Recruits faced off under the eyes of veteran instructors, many of whom had bled in actual campaigns. They knew what mattered, they knew what killed. And they taught not just how to strike, but when. Every strike in training was a future decision made without thought. A man who hesitated in real battle died. A man who reacted from muscle survived. Mistakes weren't just corrected, they were punished. Because Rome believed that punishment carved discipline deeper than reward. And discipline was everything. That's why centurions were feared more than enemy arrows. These men, commanding 80 soldiers each, were the iron fists of Roman order. They carried a vine staff, not as a symbol, but as a weapon. They beat soldiers in public for errors, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. Fall asleep on guard, you might face lashes or starvation. Steal from the camp, expect isolation, chains, or worse. But there was one punishment feared above all. Decimation. It sounds like myth, but it was real. When an entire unit failed, whether from cowardice, mutiny, or betrayal, Rome responded with horror. 1 out of every 10 men was selected at random, and then executed by their own comrades, stoned, beaten, flogged. It didn't matter if they were guilty or innocent. It was about fear. It was about control. You watched your friend die and knew you would not make the same mistake. This is why Roman legions held the line when others broke, why they stood when others ran. Not because they lacked fear, but because fear was weaponized. Fear of Rome, fear of the centurion, fear of shame, fear of decimation. The result? An army that moved like a machine, that fought like one body, that obeyed like instinct. By the end of training, recruits were no longer civilians. They no longer spoke like them, moved like them, or thought like them. They walked differently, looked differently. They were leaner, harder, deadlier. But most importantly, they believed in the uniform, in the structure, in the discipline. They were ready, not just to fight, but to die. And the final step, the one that turned a trained recruit into a Roman legionary, was still to come. After months of sweat, exhaustion, and punishment, the final test was not of the body, but of the soul. It was called the sacramentum, the sacred oath of loyalty. Once spoken, it could never be undone. It was the moment a recruit stopped being a man and became a weapon owned by Rome. The ritual was solemn, even holy. In the early Republic, the oath was sworn to the Senate and the Roman people. But in the imperial age, everything changed. Now the oath was to the emperor himself. He was no longer just a ruler. He was commander, protector, and in the eyes of many, a god. The legionary would stand before his comrades and vow to obey without hesitation, to never abandon my post, to fight until the last breath, to die if needed for Rome. It wasn't poetry, it was a contract, signed not with ink but with blood, sweat, and silence. From that moment on, disobedience wasn't just a crime, it was betrayal. Cowardice wasn't just weakness, it was treason. The oath pierced deeper than any sword. And as proof of that vow, each soldier was given a bronze military diploma, a plaque etched with his name, enlistment date, and official status. It was more than a document, it was identity. To lose it was shame, to forge it was death. It granted rights, rewards, and recognition, and every legionary protected it like his own life. But loyalty came with benefits. The Roman system understood that fear might discipline a man, but reward kept him faithful. Each soldier received a monthly wage, small but consistent, enough to support a simple life, and more than many laborers could dream of. There were also donativa, special cash bonuses, often gifted by generals or emperors after successful campaigns or to secure loyalty during unrest. But the true reward came at the end of service. After 20 to 25 years, if he survived, the legionary was granted land, sometimes a plot in a conquered province, sometimes money in place of it. For auxiliary troops, non-Roman soldiers from the empire's farthest corners, the reward could be even greater, full Roman citizenship, a gift that extended to their children and grandchildren. This wasn't just a thank you, it was strategy. A retired soldier with land was a loyal Roman citizen, a stable settler, a quiet threat to local rebellions. Rome paid its soldiers not only to fight, but to expand the empire with their blood and then anchor it with their roots. Yet, despite the reward, few soldiers made it to retirement untouched. Wars in distant lands claimed many. Disease, injury, exhaustion, others. But for those who endured, the rewards were real. Honor, status, legacy. They returned not as peasants, but as heroes, as men who had carried the eagle of Rome across the known world. But even outside battle, the life of a legionary was constant labor. In peacetime, legions were not idle. They built roads, bridges, forts. They carved Rome's infrastructure with their own hands. Every Roman road, stretching like veins across the empire, was laid by soldiers' sweat. They didn't just conquer, they connected. Inside the camps, discipline continued. Daily drills, inspections, weapon maintenance. Every morning was a repetition of readiness. And at night, silence and order. Gambling was discouraged. Drinking was restricted. And any signs of unrest were dealt with before they could spread. The camp itself was a masterpiece. Fortified walls, wooden or stone. A central command tent. Barracks arranged with military precision. Workshops, armories, bakeries, even bathhouses. A Roman legionary camp wasn't just a base. It was a mobile city. Set up in hours, torn down in hours, replicated across the empire like stamped steel. And inside those walls, brotherhood was forged. A soldier lived, ate, trained, and fought beside the same men for years. Bonds formed not from affection, but survival. You trusted the man beside you not because you liked him, but because your life depended on him, and he on you. In the heat of battle, it was those bonds that held the line. When chaos erupted, when arrows rained and enemies screamed, it wasn't courage that kept men in formation, it was loyalty. To the unit, to the centurion, to the eagle they marched beneath. That eagle, Aquila, was the soul of the legion. A silver or bronze sculpture mounted on a pole carried by the Aquilifer. If the eagle fell, morale shattered. If the eagle was captured, it was national disgrace. Some emperors launched entire campaigns just to retrieve a lost eagle. because the legion could fall, but the symbol never. Even in death, the legionary served Rome. Burial was handled with dignity. Simple grave, marked with the legion symbol, the soldier's name, and years of service. Often, the gravestone included a carving of the soldier in full armor, standing eternally ready. But if he died without honor, if he fled, betrayed, or failed, his name was erased, forgotten, his oath broken, his memory cursed. That was the unspoken truth behind the oath. You were not just swearing to live for Rome. You were swearing to die for it if needed, and to die well. A Roman legionary was not remembered for how he lived, but for how he stood, in formation, in discipline, in the face of death. The strength of Rome was never just in its numbers. It was in its structure, its doctrine, and above all, in the unshakable unity of its soldiers. At the heart of this unity was one unbreakable principle: never break formation. Battle was not chaos for the Roman legion, it was choreography. Every step, every strike, every shield raised was practiced 1,000 times before the first enemy appeared. On the battlefield, there was no room for improvisation, only execution. The most iconic tactic of the legions was the testudo, the tortoise. At the centurion's command, shields locked above and around the soldiers like scales on a beast. Arrows rained, spears flew, but the formation held. Slow, steady, invincible, an iron wall advancing across the earth. Behind that wall were men who had marched for days, gone without sleep, and yet stood ready to kill without hesitation. And when the command came to charge, when the gladi were drawn and the pila thrown, it was not a roar of chaos, but a surge of calculated violence. Roman battles were won before the fighting began, because Rome's enemies often relied on rage and bravery. Rome relied on discipline. While others charged blindly, the legion waited. While others screamed, the legion listened. When others broke, the legion advanced. But Rome's strength wasn't just on the battlefield. It was in how it prepared for war. Before every campaign, the legions constructed fortified camps, perfectly measured, every trench and palisade planned. These weren't temporary shelters. They were statements. Rome is here now. Even in foreign lands, the legion made itself at home, with walls, gates, sentries, and order. Each night, soldiers stood watch in shifts. Each day, they maintained weapons, sharpened blades, reinforced armor. Complacency was the true enemy, and Rome never let it take root. Then came the battles that tested everything. Teutoburg Forest, Cannae, Alesia, Judea. Some were victories, some were disasters, but in each, the legion's identity remained intact. Even in defeat, they regrouped, restructured, returned, because the true power of Rome was not that it never fell, but that it always rose again. Even after crushing losses, Rome rebuilt. New recruits trained, new leaders emerged, and the eagle marched forward once more. Centuries passed, emperors came and went, but the legion endured. At its height, Rome fielded over 30 legions, more than 150,000 professional soldiers, backed by 180,000 auxiliary troops. Together, they guarded over 10,000 kilometers of borders, deserts, mountains, rivers, forests. And every soldier from Britannia to Syria obeyed the same commands, followed the same formations, swore the same oath. That unity, the ability to mobilize thousands with a single order, was unmatched in history. To make that possible, Rome perfected logistics. Roads stretched across the empire like arteries, stone-laid, elevated, and measured to precision. Supply lines moved food, weapons, and reinforcements faster than any other power of the ancient world. Depots stored grain and gear. Messengers rode day and night, ensuring Rome's heartbeat never faltered. No army in antiquity could match this, because no other civilization thought of war not just as a clash of swords, but as a system. And in that system, the legionary was both cog and engine, individually replaceable, collectively unstoppable. But time, even for Rome, is undefeated. By the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the world had changed. The legions, once the pride of the empire, faced new enemies and internal decay. Corruption, civil wars, economic strain, these began to rot the core of Roman strength. The recruitment pool shrank, loyalty became fragmented, discipline eroded, and slowly the precision gave way to desperation. Rome began to rely more on foreign mercenaries. The old standards were forgotten. The oath became hollow. And yet, even as the empire collapsed, echoes of the legions remained. Medieval armies copied their formations. Modern militaries studied their discipline. Generals like Napoleon, Eisenhower, and Patton admired their structure. Even today, in military academies across the globe, cadets learn from Rome. Because Rome didn't just create an army, it created a blueprint. A way of turning men into machines, of turning chaos into control, of turning fear into fuel. The legacy of the Roman legion lives on, not just in history books, but in every soldier who trains, marches, and obeys. And at the center of that legacy is the forgotten man, the nameless legionary. He who never wrote the history, but bled for it. He who never ruled the empire, but held it together. He who marched for days, fought for hours, and died for an idea that outlived him. Rome did not conquer the world by chance. It conquered it through discipline, through blood, through sweat, and through the unbreakable will of the men in its legions. So when you walk the ruins of a Roman road or stand beneath the crumbling shadow of an ancient fort, remember, it was not emperors who built them. It was the soldier. It was the legionary. It was Rome. Your full 4-chapter voiceover script is now complete. Let me know if you'd like a combined version in a single document, an SEO-optimized title description tags for YouTube, or thumbnail image prompts for this topic. 11:54 p.m. 812025, Ali Bath. A Roman legionary was not remembered for how he lived, but for how he stood, in formation, in discipline, in the face of death. The strength of Rome was never just in its numbers. It was in its structure, its doctrine, and above all, in the unshakable unity of its soldiers. At the heart of this unity was one unbreakable principle: never break formation. Battle was not chaos for the Roman legion, it was choreography. Every step, every strike, every shield raised was practiced 1,000 times before the first enemy appeared. On the battlefield, there was no room for improvisation, only execution. The most iconic tactic of the legions was the testudo, the tortoise. At the centurion's command, shields locked above and around the soldiers like scales on a beast. 11:56 p.m. 812025, Ali Bath. The Roman legionary was not just a fighter. He was a product of intense mental conditioning, crafted not only for war, but for a way of thinking that shaped an empire. To understand Rome's true power, you must go beyond tactics, beyond formations, beyond swords and marching feet. You must step inside the mind of the man who wore the armor. Because Rome didn't just want soldiers, it wanted believers. From the very first day, a recruit's identity was stripped. His clothes, his speech, even his posture, everything civilian was peeled away. In its place came uniformity, routine, ritual. He learned to wake not when he chose, but when the horn sounded. He ate not what he wanted, but what was rationed. He spoke only when spoken to. He walked with a new purpose, measured, alert, efficient. Every part of his life was dictated by discipline. That was the point. Because war, to Rome, wasn't a moment, it was a lifestyle. And to survive it, the soldier had to become something more than flesh. He had to become a pattern of responses, trained so deeply that fear and fatigue could never override them. March, halt, form ranks, raise shields, throw pilum, advance. No thinking, just execution. And yet this wasn't blind obedience. It was purposeful submission. The legionary learned to trust the system, to believe that the formation would protect him, the centurion would guide him, and the eagle above him would never fall. Psychologically, this gave Rome an edge that no barbarian horde could match. Because the real battlefield isn't just the terrain, it's the human mind. Barbarian warriors often fought for glory, rage, or personal revenge. They screamed, they charged, they fought as individuals, but individuals break. The Roman soldier fought as part of something greater. He found strength in silence, purpose in position, and courage not in emotion, but in structure. When chaos exploded around him, when comrades fell and blood soaked the soil, the legionary didn't collapse inward. He tightened formation. He didn't run, he advanced. That mindset was Rome's most powerful weapon. And Rome fed it with meaning. The symbols mattered. The eagle, Aquila, wasn't just decoration. It was soul. Carried into battle, it reminded every man that he was part of something immortal. To lose the eagle was to lose Rome's dignity. To protect it was worth dying for. The standard bearers were marked men. Enemies targeted them first, but they never fled, because behind them the legion advanced. And if the standard fell, the line faltered. Every soldier knew this. Every man carried the weight of symbolism into battle. Even the armor had meaning. The segmented larica segmentata wasn't just protection, it was a badge. When polished, it gleamed like silver fire under the sun, intimidating, beautiful, eternal. It told the world, we are Rome. And beneath that armor, they wore the red tunic, blood red, not just for visibility, but to hide wounds, to show unity, to symbolize sacrifice. But the symbols went deeper still. When a soldier died in battle, his body was retrieved, if possible. He was buried with dignity, rites performed, comrades present. His grave marked with his name, his legion, and the years he gave to Rome. Even in death, the order was maintained. He was not just a man who died, he was a man who served. And centuries later, we still remember them, not by name, but by symbol. The boots on the ground, the shield walls, the standards raised high against storm and fire. Yet beneath the discipline, beneath the cold steel, the legionary remained human. He missed home, he feared pain, he remembered childhood, he longed for peace. But he endured, because he had been trained to, because Rome demanded it. Some returned as old men, scarred and weary. Others never returned at all. But every one of them shaped the map, the borders of modern Europe, the roads beneath our feet, the ruins we still visit today. And perhaps, most importantly, they shaped the idea that order can conquer chaos, that discipline can overcome fear, that a man can become more than himself when he believes in something greater. This is why we still speak of them. Not because they were perfect, but because they were committed. In a world ruled by emperors and gods, it was the anonymous soldier, the man in the dirt, the sweat, the shield line, who built the empire. So the next time you hear the name Rome, don't picture the marble temples, the gold, or the glory. Picture the man standing at the edge of the battlefield. Armor dented, eyes forward. Oath in his heart. Sword in hand. That man was Rome. And Rome was unstoppable.